Man, what does Jesus mean when he says in John 14:15, "If you love me, you will obey my commandments"?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, he's God, right? So does this mean he's talking about all the commands he's ever given, from Genesis to Revelation? Because that would include the 613 commandments given in the Old Testament, right?
Well, this is why it's a good question, because so many people will use this verse to suggest just that.
Right.
So let's zoom in on this and some other passages.
Okay.
This is the night before Jesus' crucifixion. He's in the upper room with his disciples. He tells Judas to basically go ahead and do what he's going to do, referring to how he'll betray him, and Judas leaves. But he continues on instructing his disciples with a new commandment.
A new commandment?
Yes, he tells them to love one another, just as I have loved you. Verse 35, by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
Right.
But then he goes on to say this verse in question, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But this theme is repeated in John's later writings as well, where he says in 1 John chapter 5, verse 2 and 3, this is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands. Also in the same chapter of John chapter 14, in verse 21, Jesus says, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them.
Okay.
But the original language used here, this word commandments, doesn't have to mean obeying a list of moral instructions. These commands, based on what I'll be sharing in a minute, are referring to all Jesus' teachings. Again, he's about to go to the cross. He was their rabbi. And so this is a moment where he's reflecting back and basically saying, everything I taught you, obey it. Verse 23 and 24 of this chapter, Jesus says, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me. So again, this is about his teaching to his students.
Okay.
But this is also about the full scope of Christ's revelation. In John chapter 8, verses 31 through 37, Jesus says to these Jews who believed in him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, we are offspring of Abraham, and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? And Jesus answers them saying, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are the offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so it's those who believe and receive the truth of who Jesus is, who are set free and thus hold to his teachings or keep his commands.
Okay.
But immediately after Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey my commandments, he also adds, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, referring to the Holy Spirit, because he knew living in this fallen world, we would need divine help.
True.
Plus, Jesus set the example for us with his obedience to the Father. So when we obey Christ and his commands, all we're doing is following his example. John chapter 13, verses 15 through 16, Jesus says, for I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So notice how he says, just as I have done to you. In other words, how I've treated you, what I've taught you, these are my commandments. I'm showing you what obedience to God looks like. What he didn't say was, look at how perfectly I kept the Jewish law. He didn't say that. He said, just as I have done to you, you should also do.
Okay.
And Jesus beautifully answers a Pharisee who was trying to trap him in Matthew chapter 22 when he asks him, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replies, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So how do we love God with all our heart, soul, and mind? By obeying him. How do we obey him? By following his example, which was lowering himself as a servant, loving his neighbor as himself. What Christ taught and how he treated those around him. Those are the commandments in full display for us to follow.
Makes sense.
We can't confuse the tasks Jesus had to fulfill with the Old Covenant with what he taught or how he treated others, because he didn't call us to come alongside him and fulfill the law with him. We couldn't do that even if we tried. He fulfilled the law so that we could rest in him and now be motivated by gratitude rather than duty, so that we want to love God by loving our neighbor as ourselves. So yeah, I mean, this doesn't mean we can't decide not to eat pork or do anything else in the old law. We have that freedom, but his commands have been simplified by his work and given new motivation through the power of the resurrection and the Holy Spirit, who is our helper.
Okay.
To summarize this, I'll leave you with 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. John writes, we love because he first loved us. There's no greater model than that.